everyone. Welcome to the very first episode of Help Me Understand HoCo. And this is going to be a series of podcasts that really are designed to help everybody just sort of understand the inner workings and the outer workings of the county a little better. So this episode, the first episode, is Help Me Understand the County Budget Process. And my guest today is Deb Jung, our County Council Chairwoman. Welcome, Deb.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to this.
It's good to see you. It's good to see anybody these days.
Even if it's only virtual, it's good to see you too.
So let's start. I'm going to start sort of walking through and jump in as I go along. The county budget is extensive and complicated. It's 262 pages this year. The way it starts, in my mind, is the Board of Ed, which is the biggest chunk of our budget, is our education initiatives. So the Board of Ed, also an elected body, have their deliberations. They start in January, and the superintendent of schools comes to the board with his budget recommendations, and then they have at it. And they go through lots of hearings and public hearings, and they get input, and they come up with their budget that they then present to the county executive. All the other departments in county government also present their budgets and their budget requests to the county executive, who then compiles them all, makes his adjustments, sets his priorities, and sends them off to you. Along this whole process, we also have a body called the Spending Affordability Advisory Committee, which is chaired by our budget director, Dr. Holly Sun, and has 22 members this year of citizens throughout the county. Many of them have been on this committee for a long time. It's a very independent-minded committee, and their role is really to look kind of at the big picture, what our fiscal situation is, and make recommendations and provide some guidance and information to both the county executive and the county council as you work through and deliberate with each other and hear input from citizens, and then make your decision, and ultimately a budget is passed. The revenue for the county really comes from two places. 90% of our revenue stream comes from property taxes and income taxes. We can't really fiddle with those very much, correct?
Well, you can fiddle still with the property tax, although people don't like it to be fiddled with. We can't fiddle at all with the income tax because Howard County is at the top. The property tax, it could be raised, but I think that probably one of the reasons why past county councils have been very reluctant to raise it, and I would say probably our county council as well, although I don't want to speak for my colleagues, but each year, not every year, but every 3 years, your property is reassessed. And because of where we live and the popularity of Howard County, mostly because of our grade school system, the assessment on your house goes up. So people get a little confused about that because they think, oh, you're raising my property taxes all the time. Why are you always raising my property taxes? And what you have to explain is that actually the assessed value of your house has gone up. The property tax is the same, but because the assessed value has gone up, the property tax is higher than it was. So that's how property taxes have, for the most part, gone up here in Howard County.
So the budget has now come to the county council, and the county council has an opportunity to add amendments to it. And amendments have been added. So
this year they have. They were added last year too, I should say.
Sure, and that is not unusual at all to add for the county council to put its stamp on the county budget. That is, after all, the checks and balances of our system.
That's right.
And so there are really two approaches to making up for the revenue and the expenses not equating out, because county budgets, unlike a federal budget, have to be reconciled.
Yes, they have to. Yep, they have to come out even. You can't spend more than you have in revenue. Yep. balanced budget every year.
So there were two approaches taken this year in using amendments. The first approach was 2 additional fees. Can you talk a little bit about those?
So one is a transfer tax, and the other one is the recordation fee. And the transfer tax in Howard County is at 1% right now. And you are allowed by state law to raise it as high as 1.5%. The transfer tax bill would raise the transfer tax to 1.5%. The recordation fee is right now in Howard County among the lowest recordation fees in the state, and at $2 per $500 worth of value in a house. So when you sell your house, you calculate $2 times every $500 of what your house is worth, and that's how you determine what your recordation fee is.
And these are fees that are paid at settlement, correct?
Yes, they're paid at settlement. They're also the same recordation fee is also imposed on commercial property. So it isn't just homeowners that pay it, but commercial property developers or buyers would also pay this recordation fee. So the recordation tax bill that was introduced by Christiana Rigby and Opal Jones was to actually, I'm sorry, I misspoke earlier. It's now at $2.50 per 500. So it would take the recordation fee down to $2 per 500 if it's a house or a building that's being sold for less than $250,000. It would stay at $250 between $250,000 and $300,000, and after that it goes up exponentially to $11 per 500 when you reach the $1 million mark. So today, a house that's sold for $1 million would pay about $6,000 in recordation tax, and if this bill were to pass, that same person would pay $18,000. Just to give you an idea of what that would mean to a homeowner. A commercial, some of the commercial buyers and sellers came in and talked about this from their perspective, and their rate would go up an amazing amount. So they were talking about a property that somebody was talking about buying recently that was $44 million, and they would end up having to pay $240,000 in recordation taxes. So it can have a dampening effect on attracting commercial development to the county, which in most instances is the type of activity that you want to have in the county, because they pay taxes and they don't have students that go to schools who then need new schools to be built because we don't have enough room in our schools today. So these two bills were controversial because myself and two of my colleagues, felt that during a pandemic and a recessionary economy, that you don't want to be raising taxes on your residents. And we felt very strongly about that. We also were worried that, particularly the recordation tax, because that one was a bigger one, that the amount of money that would be generated by the recordation fee was speculative. We have no idea during this pandemic whether we'll be selling as many houses, people will be interested in moving, whether they're just going to stay put right where they are. They don't want to pack up their stuff in a moving van and go from one place to another. So the recordation tax fee that they think would be able to be generated by the new recordation tax was $21 million. And I and my other two colleagues were skeptical that that amount would actually be raised during this coming year. So we took the position that what we need to do, since the budget that we received from the county executive included that $21 million worth of income in it, that we would then take his budget, which was at 2.6% growth, and we would take down his growth limit or his growth amount to about 1.43%. So his budget under what we've been trying to do for the last 5 weeks is still growing, but not at the rate that the county executive had handed to us.
So let's just sort of walk through these amendments and try to just explain what they're about. Since we're using this year as an example.
Okay.
You're getting your binder?
I'm looking at like you're going to go through these individual amendments. I'll do my best.
Amendment 10 is where we start getting into the amendments that were filed by yourself, Councilman Youngman, and Councilwoman Walsh.
Yes.
So Amendment 10.
Lana, you are not going to ask me about every one of these personnel positions.
I'm not, but Amendment 10 generally has to do with personnel positions.
It does.
One of the things that, and one of the reasons I thought it would be a good idea to sort of use this year's budget to walk through this process is because I've seen a lot of, not a lot necessarily, but some confusion out there about what is in these amendments and what isn't in these amendments. When it comes to personnel, are we terminating 21 current county employees?
So there were a couple things that went on. This is a very complicated process, as you can imagine. And in order to actually get through this process, we have to rely heavily on our auditor. So the auditor is actually a part of the county council office. And we go to the auditor's office and ask them for assistance and rely on them heavily during this budget process in order to understand the budget for ourselves, in order to understand where all the different funds are, and in order to understand if we wanted to put something in contingency, how to do that, if we wanted to cut positions, how to do that. So we knew that we wanted to take $21 million out of the operating budget. And at the outset, we had asked for a list of all the vacancies. Not for any, we did not want a list that included anybody who was presently employed at the county. And it was never our intention to fire anybody or lay off anybody or terminate anyone who was an employee of the county. I think there was a mistake. And there was initially 21 positions taken out of the budget that had actually already been filled. So that was a small brouhaha, but we right away told the administration that that was never our intention to actually remove 21 positions that had already been filled. And we actually have an amendment that puts those 21 people back where they belong. So there were a total of about 49 vacancies. And I say about because we still don't know, are these actually the real number of vacancies that we have? It could be a couple less, it could be a couple more. We don't know each department individually well enough to know that these are the people that a department could, where these are the positions that could remain vacant and the department could still function perfectly well. That really isn't our expertise. So we wanted and hoped that the administration would help us locate the positions that they felt they would be able to give up for 6 months, maybe a year. We're not sure. Right now, the amendments are for a year. So those vacancies would be removed for 1 year. Now, we were also looking all along at ways to take some of the money that we saved from the capital budget to put it in a fund, one of our many funds called a fund balance, to allow the county executive to take money out of that fund balance and use it to fill these positions. The initial cut of vacancies appeared to be around 5.7 million, and the money that we saved from capital that we put into a fund balance was 6.3 million. So if the county executive wanted to take all of the fund balance that we saved from capital and fill the positions, all the vacancies, then he would be able to do so.
So Amendment 12 is really kind of your scalpel technique.
We looked at projects that, or line items that had money in them for the last year, 2 years, 3 years, but had not been spent. at all, or where only half of it had been spent. We looked at areas where, and this was one of them, bridge inspections, just to give you an idea. So bridge inspections, every year, the county executive puts between $250,000 and $300,000 into bridge inspections so that we can inspect all of our bridges. For whatever reason, and we still don't know why, this year there was $500,000 in bridge inspections. We don't have almost double the number of bridges in our county in the last year. So we removed $200,000 from bridge inspections and took it back to the level that it's been at historically. There were a number of items that, like the bicycle plan, ADA ramps, curb and replacements, those were a pedestrian plan projects, those sidewalk repairs. A number of these projects had money in them that had not been spent. $2 million, $3 million, $1.5 million, and that money had been in there from last year, and they had not spent the money from last year. So our feeling was, well, this is an area where you could take some money out of the increase for this year, since they had not even spent the money from last year. And then there was a couple of others where we did take quite a bit of money from those projects in the belief that this is going to be a tough year. We're just going to have to deal without a lot of road resurfacing this year. We'll bring it back next year, but there's a lot of money in that.
So let me just walk through. I have a list of some things that I've seen people be concerned about or upset about.
Okay.
So let's start flood mitigation.
Flood mitigation is intact, and all the big projects that have been in the budget are still there. And from what I understand from Councilmember Walsh, that amounts to about $30 million, which includes money that was obtained by our state legislators, who did a great job bringing money back from the state to help with our flood mitigation efforts.
The FiftyPlus Center in East Columbia.
So that one, we did cut some money out of it. And interestingly enough, so did the county executive. So he originally had, I think, 8 million going in, and then took a couple million out. And I think, I'm not sure the exact amount, but I know that there's 8 million left in the budget, and the project can move ahead. It may be delayed. The finish of it may be delayed by 6 months.
Systemic renovations for Hammond High School and Talbot Springs Elementary School.
So again, I think there might be some misinformation out there. Talbot Springs is fully funded. There is not only money in Talbot Springs from our budget, which we didn't touch, but there's also state money that is matching our money for Talbot Springs. And it is construction ready. And as soon as we pass this budget, I'm anticipating that they're probably going to have a bulldozer over there. So I don't know why there was ever any mention of Talbot Springs. Hammond is a little more complicated because there is no state matching money. So all of the money that goes to renovate Hammond will be coming from our own county general fund. Now, right now, that money is slated to come from the increase in the transfer tax. And the problem with having Hammond funded by the increase from the transfer tax is the amount of money that we would need to complete that project would basically tie up the entire increase in the transfer tax for the next 20 years. So any possibility of using that increase that we're being asked to vote on this coming week for any systemic efforts within the school district would not occur. We will not be able to use that increase in the transfer tax for anything but the Hammond project for 20 years. So we are contemplating, and I say we, my colleagues, and I believe maybe the administration is also interested in this, creating, finding a way to fund Hammond outside of the transfer tax, because it is apparently there's a good possibility we're going to get money for the project next year. So if we can,
From the state, money
from the state, yes. So if we can get money, if we can find enough money to get the project started this year from another source besides the transfer, the increase in the transfer tax, then we can get the project going. And next year we will have the state match, and that will allow us to put that whole project on better financial footing.
Renovations to address security needs at the detention center.
So that's the general line. And there were two pieces to that. One of them had to do with renovating the medical suite, and the other one had to do with locking systems, I think, and replacement of windows. And I believe we took out the money that had to do with replacement of the medical suite and left in enough money to move forward on the replacement of the locking systems for getting in and out and the windows.
Community resources for seniors, residents with developmental disabilities, and services to our most vulnerable populations.
Okay, so I think there were 6 positions in community resources that the director asked to put back in the budget. And I believe that some of those positions are going to get put back in the budget.
And then finally, and this is sort of the big elephant in the room, is the Cultural Arts Center in downtown Columbia. And that's your district.
Right. So it's not an easy conversation to have because so many people are so invested in this cultural center, which I do truly understand. And I, too, am an advocate of making sure that downtown Columbia gets built out in a way that certainly that honors all the people who were so involved in this process for so many years, and that puts into effect what I know those of us who have lived here for a really long time really believe are the Jim Rouse ideals of having people of all incomes and all races living in the same neighborhoods, right next to each other.
And so just to back up for a second, the Cultural Arts Center is...
And the Cultural Arts Center is both a cultural arts center right now, the way it's designed, and it is mixed income housing on top of the Cultural Arts Center. So it's both affordable housing and a cultural arts center.
And it will be located where Toby's Dinner Theater is currently.
The Cultural Arts Center would take up, along with the mixed income housing on top of it, would take up about, I guess, that whole area along South Entrance Road, where not only where Toby's is, but then going up beyond where Toby's is toward Little Patuxent Parkway. And it would include low-income housing, what they call and to build the low-income housing, it would take low-income housing tax credits, which are called LIHTCs.
And really, it's my understanding that no moderate or low income housing, affordable housing, so to speak, gets built without these kind of tax credits.
I think that that's probably true. I don't imagine that you could do that. Yeah, because housing is expensive to build. So
and these are federal tax credits. There are 2 different kinds. One of them is a competitive, you're actually competing against other jurisdictions to get the tax credit. That's a 9% tax credit. And the other is a 4% tax credit. And this project uses both.
Yes, it's a big project.
Yeah.
So I guess it was 10 years ago. This was during the period when there were many people in Columbia who were participating in charrettes and were determining what they wanted the future of downtown Columbia to look like. And they decided, this group of Columbia citizens, that what they really were hoping for were these public buildings that had low and moderate income and also, I guess, regular priced housing, all apartments, on top of the public projects, the public works projects. And those projects included a new library that would go in what is now called the Juniper District, which is where the brand new Tenable building is located and where Busboys and Poets will be built. The Downtown Cultural Center, which we just started talking about. The Banneker Fire Station, which would be torn down, and they would have low-income senior housing built on top of that. And a transit center, which would be located in and around the mall. So the first project that looks like it would be getting off the ground, and I still believe it will, is the Downtown Cultural Center. So the first time we heard about the Downtown Cultural Center was when we received our capital budget book. And none of us had known, I don't think, at least I know myself and council members Youngman and Walsh had no idea that this project was that the county executive was going to ask for funding for this project this coming year. And the funding for this project appears to be from a number of different places, and it's a number of different pots of money. So there's $9 million that the county is being asked to contribute toward a garage. And the Housing Commission would also be paying for a portion of that garage. Then there's $33 million that would be bonded, and the bonds would be backed by the tax increment that is being received from the property taxes collected from Howard Hughes. And then there is another piece that would have been $28 million of what were initially called other bonds. And other bonds are something that's backed by something other than the property taxes and the income taxes in the general fund revenues. But as time went on, one of the things that we eventually realized was the other bond funding was almost $1 million in recreation and parks revenue, and we don't appear to have $1 million in recreation and parks revenue, which meant that the bonds would ultimately have to be what we call GO bonds, government obligation bonds. Every $1 million of government obligation bonds cost in debt service to the county $70,000. So if you take a $28 million bond, you know that over the course of the years, it'll be at least $2 million to service that debt. So we started to get concerned about a number of things. We realized that there's going to be more debt service than what we initially had thought there would be. And then we were told as the time went on, very quickly, since it was only over the course of about 4 or 5 weeks, that there would be an extra $4 million in operating costs because the Howard County Arts Council, who initially was going to be running the cultural center, was no longer going to be doing so. And as a result, our own Department of Recreation and Parks were going to be in charge of running the cultural center. That was also concerning because now we were going from an arts council, which is very familiar with running arts businesses and what that means, to having an entity that didn't have certainly not the depth or breadth of experience in running arts type of entities. And it also meant that we would ultimately be adding $6 million or more to our operating budget every year between debt service and operating expenses, and who knows how much that could go up. As we got more and more information, we realized this is a really big obligation, almost as costly as the courthouse, which is being built right now. So we'll be adding to our operating budget in a very short period of time, both $10 million for this obligation payment on the courthouse, and then potentially another $6 or $7 million in operating expenses for the cultural center. And at that point, I think that the three of us, myself and Mr. Youngman and Ms. Walsh, said, we need to take a breath. We need to pause and see what this year brings. This is going to be a tough year, and we need to know if this is the amount of money that we can afford as a county to spend on this project. Maybe we have to scale it back a little bit. Maybe we have to look for some different entities to take on the rental space so that they can pay enough that they can pay for the operating costs as well. Maybe we put in a big bar because apparently selling alcohol is a good way to make money. So there are a variety of things that I think we need to explore over the next year to see how the cultural center with the mixed and affordable housing above it can move forward. That is the desire of myself and Mr. Youngman, and I'm pretty sure at least two other of the council members, to see that this project goes forward. And I hope that it does. I'll be doing everything possible this coming year to explore all these ideas and to make sure that we're in the right kind of fiscal situation to continue with the project.
I think the concern that most people have about putting it off a year are these tax credits, these federal tax credits, which are a big part of the financing of the construction and development. And can we extend them or defer them, or what are your thoughts on that?
The credits themselves don't expire right now or next year or the year after. The credits are designed so that you are supposed to have the people living in the apartments by 2023. So that does give us time to figure out, there might even be a way to build the project so that we can have people living in the apartments by 2023, but maybe don't build out the cultural center shell. Maybe that's the second part of the project as opposed to the first part of the project. So there might be different ways to design the project to make sure that without even having to go and ask for an extension.
As we were talking a little while ago, this is your district. This is part of a plan that was passed, the downtown plan, in 2010. So we're 10 years into a 30-year plan. What are your priorities for downtown? And I know we're stepping away from the budget a little bit.
Right. Well, when my husband and I moved here 33 years ago, we were younger, and we both had actually spent a lot of time living in cities during our 20s and our teens and college and up until we moved to Columbia, really. And we missed having a city center when we moved here. We spent a lot of our weekends running over to Baltimore or running over to Washington, D.C. And my hope for downtown Columbia, and I do think a lot of this is going to happen, is that downtown Columbia is exciting enough and vibrant enough that people who were my age when I moved to Columbia, which was, I was 31 when I moved here, that those young people will say, oh man, we don't have to go to Baltimore, DC. There's a lot to do right here. This is really exciting. This is really cool. Let's go to downtown Columbia and walk around.
Before we get back to the budget, while we're still covering the Cultural Arts Center and downtown Columbia and the downtown plan, how do you think the situation we're in now with COVID-19 is going to affect? What are some concerns you might have with how COVID-19 might affect a plan that's a third of the way through?
My biggest concern is how commercial tenants will be looking at renting commercial space, and how these last 2.5 months have changed our thought process about where and how we can do work, with so many of us doing that work at home. So will there be as much of a need for as many commercial buildings as Howard Hughes was planning? Maybe they want to build more units. I don't know. I don't know how it will impact them, or if they're just going to proceed along with their plan. I don't think that it's going to impact the number of people who have already moved here and already like it and enjoy living here in the new units that have just been built recently. I think that what Howard Hughes has already done will continue to influence what's being done in Columbia with the types of apartments they're building, the amenities that they have in the apartments, the creation of space that can be energized by public art or by a speaker's corner or various other things. But I think COVID itself is going to have an impact on how much gathering people want to do. I know there's going to be a financial hit everywhere in the country, and we already know that as of last week, and that this didn't include last week's numbers, there were 26,000 people in Howard County who had become unemployed from the time that the governor declared his emergency order. That's a lot. And that can't help but have an impact on our financial situation in the county. And it's a big reason why I felt that being fiscally conservative, responsible this year was important in looking at this budget and saying we need to tighten our belt. Everybody else is going to be tightening their belt. We need to tighten ours too until we have a better view of what's going to be happening in the next year.
So we're coming into the home stretch. What are the last steps involved in getting to a completed and approved budget?
Well, in the best of all worlds, the administration would be coming and talking to us and saying, oh, here are some of the things that we would really like to see in the budget. And we're going to ask you to put those things back in the budget. And we would say, that's a great idea. And actually, there's a couple more things that we left out of the budget that we want to put back in the budget too. So can we find the funding for that without raising taxes? And we would all say yes. But ultimately, if everybody's on the same page, you realize that you can find a way to work together, and you learn the fine art of compromise, which is always the best way forward. And then Wednesday morning at 10 o'clock, we start voting on these amendments.
Thank you, Deb, for helping me better understand the whole budget process. It is, I know, lengthy and exhausting, not just for you and the other council members, but really for everybody in county government, because starting way back in January, this has been kind of a living and breathing part of the job. And it happens every year.
It does. And I really appreciate you inviting me on your show to talk about this. I hope that people understand it better as a result of our conversation. And I'm so appreciative that you're interested in this topic, and that you hope that others will also gain knowledge from this.